All right, everybody, buckle up because we're diving headfirst into a topic that's everywhere these days, vaping.
And we don't just skim the surface, we go deep. So, you've sent in some seriously credible stuff from Johns Hopkins Medicine, the CDC no less, and the American Lung Association.
They're the heavy hitters when it comes to this stuff, no
All
doubt.
right.
We're talking serious research here, so we're going to cut through all the noise, all the marketing hype, and get to the bottom of what vaping is really doing, especially to our lungs.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, there's this whole idea floating around that vaping is like the safe alternative to cigarettes.
The cool kid on the block, right. But is that the whole story or just some smoke and mirrors?
Well, it's definitely a bit more complicated than the marketing campaigns would have you believe.
I mean, it's true, you're not exposed to as many toxins with e-cigarettes as you are with traditional cigarettes.
But, and this is a big bet, fewer toxins don't equal zero toxins.
It's definitely not harmless.
Okay, so no more beating around the bush. What is vaping actually doing to our bodies? We take that puff, and it's not just flavor going into our lungs, right?
One of the things that really jumped out at me from the Johns Hopkins research was just how many chemicals they found in e-liquids. We're talking thousands of chemicals.
And a lot of them are still unidentified. They even found caffeine and pesticides in there.
Hold up, caffeine and pesticides, seriously, you've got to be kidding me. What are those doing in there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
It really highlights how little we actually know about what's in these products and what the long-term effects might be.
Because, vaping is still relatively new.
The science is really just trying to catch up.
That's a good point. You mentioned before that fewer toxins don't automatically mean something's safe. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, for sure.
There's this misconception that e-cigarettes are just harmless water vapor, right? But it's actually more than that.
Yeah, that vapor, along with those thousands of chemicals, contains a key player that can really mess you up: nicotine.
Okay, so back to basics for a second. How does nicotine actually affect our bodies? We know it's addictive, but what's it doing at a physical level?
Well, the thing is, nicotine is a stimulant.
And it doesn't really care where it comes from,
Whether it's a cigarette or an e-cigarette, it's going to increase your heart rate, it's going to raise your blood pressure.
It'll make your body release adrenaline. And all of that over time, that puts stress on your heart and blood vessels.
Makes sense.
And here's the kicker. Research suggests that some e-cigarettes can actually have higher nicotine levels than traditional cigarettes.
Now that's surprising. Why would the nicotine levels in some e-cigarettes be higher?
It's all about the way the nicotine is delivered in the e-liquid.
A lot of these e-cigarettes, especially those pod systems everyone's using, they use nicotine salts.
Okay.
And those, they allow for higher concentrations of nicotine.
And your body absorbs it quicker, too. And think about it.
Some people, especially those switching from regular cigarettes, they might take more puffs or vape for longer to try and satisfy those cravings.
Right, they're used to a certain hit. That makes a lot of sense, but it's probably not something most people consider. And you brought up acrolein earlier.
Yeah.
That's one of the other chemicals found in these e-liquids.
It's our herbicide, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about like Roundup in our lungs?
Well, it's not exactly Roundup, but in essence, yeah.
Acrolein is definitely used in herbicides, and what's worrying is that it's toxic to cells.
And when we're talking about inhaling it directly into our lungs, that's a big red flag.
So not only are we potentially inhaling weed killer, but we're paying for the privilege.
But seriously, what does inhaling acrolein actually do to our lungs?
That's where it gets really concerning. It's been linked to all sorts of lung issues: acute lung injury, COPD, even lung cancer.
It's like this chain reaction of inflammation and damage in your respiratory system.
And that's just one chemical out of thousands, right? What about the others? Are there any others that we should be particularly concerned about?
Acrolein is definitely one of the more alarming ones, but it's not the only one.
Okay.
The American Lung Association, they point out that e-cigarettes also produce formaldehyde.
Which we know is a carcinogen, right?
Right.
And then there's acetaldehyde, another one linked to lung damage.
And here's the crazy thing. A UNC study found that the more ingredients an e-liquid has, the more toxic it becomes.
So wait, more flavors equal more risk? That's not exactly the message you get from all those flashy vaping ads, is it?
Not at all. And this leads us to another really concerning aspect of vaping, especially given how it's marketed.
The alarming rise of youth vaping.
Right. It seems like it's everywhere these days.
It's actually become even more popular than traditional cigarettes among young people, which is crazy to think about. It really is. It's like you walk into a store and it's a candy shop explosion.
It's true.
Cotton candy cloud, mango tango. They even have something called unicorn poop.
Yeah, and that's no accident.
Those flavors, they might seem harmless enough, but they're a huge reason why young people are so drawn to vaping.
Right.
And the problem is their brains are still developing, which makes them especially vulnerable to getting hooked on nicotine.
So we're talking about potentially lifelong consequences from something that's marketed as fun and fruity.
What kind of long-term health risks are we actually talking about here, especially for young people?
Well, think about this.
The CDC found that over 2 million middle and high school students vaped in 2021 alone. That's a staggering number. Imagine, like, insert a relatable landmark in your area with vaping teenagers.
That's a lot of teenagers.
It's a lot, and these aren't just harmless puffs we're talking about.
Right.
Getting exposed to nicotine during those crucial years can really mess with brain development.
Okay.
It can affect things like attention, learning, mood, even impulse control.
That's scary. So it's not just the brain at risk here, right?
Absolutely not.
We talked about nicotine being a stimulant.
Right.
Well, that affects young, developing cardiovascular systems even more intensely.
Putting them at a higher risk for those heart problems we discussed earlier.
It's a double whammy for young people. Brain impact and a potential future of heart problem.
It really makes you wonder, is this a gateway drug scenario? Like if someone starts with vaping, are they more likely to become smokers later on?
That's the big question, right?
And unfortunately, the research suggests that, yeah, there's a strong link between vaping and adolescence and a higher chance of smoking cigarettes later in life.
It's disheartening, but it's so important for young people and their parents to know this.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the here and now.
It's the potential consequences down the road that are really concerning.
Exactly. And it's not just about the lungs either.
Remember, anything you inhale, it has the potential to affect your entire body.
It's all connected.
Exactly. And the more we learn about e-cigarettes, the more we realize just how far-reaching those effects can be.
You've definitely given us a lot to think about today.
We've talked about the risks and misconceptions surrounding vaping, but what about people who are using it as a way to quit smoking? Is there any validity to that approach?
That's a question I get a lot.
And it's tricky. I mean, it's true that vaping might be slightly less harmful than smoking.
Okay.
You are exposed to fewer harmful chemicals overall, but it's really important to understand that it's not an FDA-approved method for quitting smoking.
Wait, so the FDA hasn't approved any e-cigarette as a safe or effective way to quit smoking?
That's exactly right.
And that's a really important distinction to make. There just isn't enough solid evidence to say for sure that vaping is a safe or effective way to quit.
It might work for some people, but it's not a guaranteed solution by any means.
That's a curveball, especially with all the marketing out there making it seem like a healthier choice.
So what's the best course of action for someone trying to quit? Should they just ditch the e-cigarette and go cold turkey?
Well, going cold turkey works for some people, but it's definitely not for everyone.
Right, different strokes.
Exactly. The best thing anyone can do is talk to their doctor.
Okay.
They can figure out what's best for your individual situation, your health history, all of that.
And help you come up with a quitting plan that's tailored for you.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation, so getting professional advice is key.
Exactly.
What about other resources? Are there any programs or support groups out there for people who are trying to quit?
Absolutely. There's a great program called Freedom from Smoking run by the American Lung Association.
Okay.
And there's always the National Quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They have trained counselors who can provide support and guidance through the whole process.
That's good to know. It's important to remember that quitting any addiction is tough, but you don't have to go it alone.
You got it. And don't beat yourself up if it takes a few tries to quit. Addiction is complex, and recovery is a journey, not a destination. The important thing is to keep trying and reach out for support when you need it.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've busted some myths, we dug into the science, and hopefully helped our listeners navigate the whole vaping landscape with a little more clarity.
I hope so.
And don't forget, the science is still evolving on this.
Yeah.
This is still a relatively new technology, and we're still figuring out all the long-term effects,
Right.
especially on young people.
It's true. Speaking of new information, something you said earlier about the CDC data showing a possible link between vaping and seizures, particularly in young people, really caught my attention.
Oh, right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so there have been reports to the FDA about seizures potentially linked to e-cigarette use. We don't fully understand the connection yet, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially for parents and young people.
It seems like every time we learn something new, it just adds another layer of complexity to this issue.
It does.
We started with lungs and heart health, And now we're seeing potential neurological impacts as well.
Exactly.
And it all comes back to that key takeaway from today's deep dive. When you inhale something into your lungs, it can affect your whole body.
It's a sobering thought for sure. It really is. We like to end our deep dives with something for you guys to chew on.
And this one's no different. So, what do you think the future holds for vaping?
Will we look back on this whole thing as just a fad? Or is this like the tip of the iceberg?
That's a tough one.
It's hard to say for sure what the future holds.
Right.
But one thing's for certain, the research will continue.
And as it does, we'll probably learn even more about the long-term effects of vaping, especially for those just starting out, young people.
It's true. It is a bit unsettling to think we're still in the early stages of understanding all of this.
But again, that's why we do these deep dives, right?
Exactly.
To learn as much as we can and make the most informed choices possible.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Knowledge is power, right?
Right.
And when it comes to our health, there's no currency more valuable.
Well said. Well, a huge thank you to you for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Your insights have been incredibly valuable, I have to say.
And to everyone listening, we hope this episode has shed some light on the often confusing world of vaping.
If you're struggling with nicotine addiction, please remember, you're not alone.
Talk to your doctor, explore the resources we mentioned, and take that first step towards a healthier, smoke-free life.
Until next time, stay curious.